you, and welcome to New York City. Today we'll be looking at Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You, portrayed excellently by Penn Badgley, and ask the question, is he an evil person? A charming, intelligent, well-read bookstore manager with a propensity for stalking and murder, as long as it's in the defense of those he thinks he loves. What makes Joe so interesting is how, depending on your point of view, he is a tragic hero whose ends justify the means for the people he loves, or he's an unstable monster who removes those who stand in his way of what he desires most. We're only going to cover Joe as he appears in the television show, leaving out the book series it's based on. However, I will touch on a few small differences that I feel are important to cover. We also will be talking a lot about stalking behavior, and if you find yourself on the receiving end, or you're possibly the stalker yourself, please get some help. I am not a mental health professional, these are just my opinions based on extensive research. With all that out of the way, on with the show. As with everyone who commits evil in the present, we first have to look at their past, and Joe isn't anything special even though he likes to think of himself as. Joe Goldberg was born on September 19, 1988 in New York City to parents Rafael Pesaro and Sandy Goldberg. And saying he was born into a dysfunctional family dynamic is putting it mildly. His father was abusive, especially towards his mother, and his abuse often drove her into the arms of other men, and occasionally she would drag Joe along and would leave him alone in public places while she was off. Later, his father would torture him, usually by burning cigarettes on his skin to gather information on his mother. And other times, she would just leave her husband and take Joe with her, but they would always eventually return. One day, while the two were alone together, Sandy would show Joe a gun that she had hidden away in a closet, and that she would someday use it on her husband. This feels like she was laying the groundwork to get him to pull the trigger instead. She showed him the gun, she said she would do it eventually, but she planted the seeds, and now Joe is thinking, well, she was going to do it, I might as well help her along. I also think this was his mother looking for a hero. I mean, she left with other men as a way of thinking, maybe this time they'll save me. But when they weren't able to, she would return. While she didn't physically abuse him, like his father, she did emotionally abuse him by abandoning him and causing him to develop an attachment disorder, craving intimacy and love, but also fearing it at the same time. The last time his father was beating on his mother, he finally grabbed the gun and shot him dead. This would be his first murder, but to be fair, it wasn't self-defense or the defense of another. But it also enforced a white knight syndrome or a savior complex that would begin to grow inside him. When he was alone with his mother, while she was out with her dalliances, he spent his time reading books, losing himself in the worlds of heroes, villains, dragons, magic, ogres, and damsels in distress. And after coming to his mother's rescue, she calls him a good boy, that he would never actually hurt anyone and that he was only just protecting her. Immediately after this, she would drop him off at a group foster home, saying that she wasn't the best thing for him. And there he would stay, abandoned by the one person he would have done anything for, that he even killed to protect. When Joe became older, he would go looking for his mother, but when he found her, she had already started a new family, telling Joe that she simply needed to start over. No, I don't think she turned Joe into a killer. In the end, his choices were his own. But as his mother, she had a responsibility to him, and she is as much to blame for his life turning out the way it did. In his teenage years, Joe would be adopted by the owner of a small bookstore named Ivan Mooney, who took him under his wing and taught him everything about books, among other things. Ivan was a hard man and would punish Joe in order to teach him lessons. His preferred method being that of locking Joe in a glass cage that was used to protect the more valuable books in Ivan's possession. We learn that Ivan was a prison guard in the Soviet Union, so it's likely he had used some of these similar punishments in the past. But even in the worst of it, Ivan reminds Joe that he is only doing it out of love, and that he didn't want him to end up like his father. Personally, it doesn't matter what his intentions were. Tormenting a young man that had already been through so much by punishing him with loneliness is just a whole new level of heartlessness. In the end, Joe cares for him, but his actions would teach Joe that control and punishment were forms of love. When he was betrayed by Candace Stone, Joe responded with violence instead of processing his emotions healthily. Mooney's past reinforcement of saying things like "some people deserve it" only validated Joe's violent behavior, solidifying his belief that obsession, control, and even murder were all justifiable expressions of love. Joe's past from his teenage years to adulthood are a bit murky, but when we first meet Joe in the beginning of season 1, on the outside, he comes across as charming, likable, well-spoken, handsome, and courteous. A man who you likely wouldn't look twice at, but would probably have a decent conversation with if you sat next to him on the subway. Of course, that's assuming he'd give you the time of day. His inner monologue shows a general disdain for most people, thinking they are uninteresting, bland, and overall boring. We see this when he interacts with customers and coworkers, as he feels he has such a keen insight on people that he can tell from just a few small details whether he'd want to interact with them. In reality, he is very much a loner. That is, until he meets anyone who he becomes obsessed over. Over the course of the story, Joe displays a variety of different disorders as he goes about connecting with people, but specifically those who he forms obsessions over. As the core of who Joe is a man who wants to be loved, who doesn't want to end up alone, and wants to find the one. I don't think anyone can blame him for wanting this. I mean, who doesn't? But it's how Joe goes about doing this that leads him down a path of evil. If we take all that we've learned about Joe so far, it's not hard to see how he ended up this way. And when he meets someone that he feels he can fall in love with, they become the center of his world, to a destructive degree. And we're going to talk about all of this starting with his first girlfriend in the show, Guinevere Beck. As soon as she walks into the bookstore, he's analyzing her, making inferences about who she is and what kind of person she is based on a few outward details such as her clothes, hair, tone of voice, and jewelry. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as we all do this in some form or another. Small judgments, inferences, and guesses are how we form human connection, and whether or not we wish to associate with someone or follow them online. What's different about Joe is that he makes assumptions and then assumes it's because these women want him, and him specifically, to notice. For example, she hands him her credit card instead of paying with cash, and Joe sees this as her wanting him to know her name. I mean, yeah, that's a possibility. Or maybe she just handed him her credit card out of habit. She wasn't wearing a bra. Did she want him to notice? Or did she just not do laundry? Did she wear jewelry to get attention from potential admirers? Or is the jewelry just an old family heirloom and she wears it wherever she goes? For Joe, all of these tiny hints are not just a method of her getting attention, but getting attention from him specifically. Sure, the two have decent chemistry and there's clearly a spark, but what does Joe do now? Perhaps before she leaves, get her number? Facebook page? Ask to get her a drink? Maybe wait until she comes back for more books? But Joe quickly goes online and looks her up. Again, I don't think there is anything inherently wrong with this, as even his coworker says he should Google her considering he has her name. But Joe takes it to an extreme by creating a narrative in his mind about him and her together. I'm going to say this one more time. I don't think this is a bad thing, as we all have seen attractive people in our day-to-day lives and have harmless fantasies about what it would be like to be with that person. However, most of us file those fantasies away and go on with our lives. But Joe doesn't do this. As he searches for various social media pages, he says things like, "You didn't mention me. That means your social media is fake and we had a connection." And he even finds her address and begins lurking outside her home. This is not okay, as it is not done with anyone's permission or consent. But Joe tells himself that he is simply doing research to make sure she won't break his heart. And when he finds her home, he notices that her windows are wide open. And he sees this as, you want people to look at you. You want me to look at you. The language that Joe uses is very important as it feeds into that narrative that he's creating, especially when he breaks into her apartment. He continues the language like, when we live together, I'll clean for you when we move in together. I'll cook for you when we live together. Keep in mind he's using language like this and he's only spoken to her once. Before we go any further, here are a few attributes of stalkers as written out by Gavin DeBecker in his book, Gift of Fear. Keep a lookout for these different characteristics as we continue this analysis, and stow them away for a rainy day in your personal life. Number 1, forced teaming. Now this is speaking in terms of like what are we doing today when we live together. Number 2 is charm. Number 3 is too many details. If a person is lying, they will add excessive details to make themselves sound more credible. Number 4 is typecasting. Now this is an insult that's used to engage in conversation just so they would have to counteract that insult. For example, "Oh, nice earrings. My grandmother wears a lot of fake jewelry too." If you know, you know. Loan sharking. Giving something and expecting something in return. The best example is paying for dinner, now you owe me sex. Number 6 is the unsolicited promise. I promise to do or not to do something when it's not asked for. This usually means the promise is going to be broken. For example, I promise I will leave you alone after such and such. That usually means they're not. And then number 7, probably the biggest one, not hearing the word no. These are just some things to keep in mind. Back to the show. As he begins courting her fully, he runs into 2 obstacles in the form of Benji, her sexual partner, and Peach, her supposed best friend. Joe sees these 2 as a detriment not only to his relationship with Beck, but to Beck as a person. He sees them as toxic and only serves to bring her down. Being that he has appointed himself as her savior, he works to remove these obstacles by locking Benji in a glass cage and shooting Peach in the head. In my opinion, the killing of Benji and Peach were his first steps towards evil. Benji was a douchebag who treated Beck poorly, there's no argument there. But being a douchebag does not necessitate a death sentence. Benji was killed for simply standing in the way of Joe acquiring Beck for himself. Peach could have been seen as a way of self-defense, sure, but as the kids say, Joe started it by attacking her in the park. And so far, we've got his body count up to 3. It's important to note that Joe's inner monologue paints himself as the hero throughout these crimes. Beck is so lucky to have a man that cares so much to remove these toxic people from her life. They would have gotten in the way of our happiness, And isn't that the whole point? Besides, it's their fault that they gave him no choice. If they were better people, he wouldn't have had to do these horrible things. I did this for you. They would have dragged you down. You should be amazed that I would go to these lengths for you to live your best life. Only a true man that genuinely loves you would do this. From all of this, it's likely Joe has a form of antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. If you see my video on Misty Quigley from Yellow Jackets, I touch a bit on ASPD, but I'll just give you a short reminder. The symptoms of ASPD are the disregard for and the violation of the rights of others. Deceitfulness, impulsivity, irritability or aggression, disregard for the safety of others and self, irresponsibility, and a lack of remorse. Narcissistic personality disorder is similar in some aspects. Both show a lack of remorse or empathy, and the use of manipulation to charm others. But the narcissist is incredibly envious and resentful of others. They have a sense of grandiosity and constant need for admiration and validation from others. And most importantly, they have a difficulty maintaining relationships. Now, in a way, I feel like Joe does feel some form of remorse for what he does, but only because he knows he's supposed to feel bad. In truth, he really doesn't. These people are simply obstacles for him to get rid of, and he files them away in the far recesses of his mind, never to be thought about again. Joe has such a warped idea of what love is that the only way he can be truly happy with the one he loves is if he can completely control and dominate them and the world around them. Which is why, when Beck starts acting outside of the narrative he had created for her, like when she starts seeing a therapist, he begins to spiral out of control. And, like Mooney, he would eventually lock her in the glass cage. Unfortunately for Joe, people are flawed, imperfect, subject to change, and once Beck finds out the truth about who Joe is, she becomes horrified and proclaims that she could never love him. With the fantasy gone and never coming back, Joe has no more use for her and would end up taking her life, framing her therapist for her murder. Attempting to create a new life, he leaves New York City for Los Angeles, and it doesn't take long for him to zero in on another woman, Love Quinn. He tells himself he's going to do it right this time, that he's not going to let his darker tendencies rule him. But this is a moot point, as he had already kidnapped and imprisoned a man to take his identity. The crimes committed in Season 2 aren't all done for Joe to get closer to Love, as I feel the creators changed up the format to make Joe seem more redeemable, as the men he murdered did kind of have it coming. There were some crimes that were committed that he was indirectly responsible for, but I'll get to those in a second. Jasper Quinn was self-defense, after Jasper had mistaked Joe for the man whose identity he had stolen. And Henderson was basically a pedophile that was moments away from taking advantage of the young Ellie Alves. And this brings his count up to 6. This is something I haven't mentioned yet, as it is a difference between Joe in the show and Joe in the books. In the show, Joe likes kids, and is evident from his neighbor Paco in Season 1, and his neighbor Ellie in Season 2. However, in the books, this isn't the case. His obsession consumes every aspect of his life in the books that he has no time for anything else. This makes me think the creators wanted to humanize Joe. Even Joe kills Paco's dad in Season 1. He was abusive to his mother and Paco, so Joe saved them by ending his life, making his count 7. Much like Dexter Morgan, this is likely Joe protecting the innocence that he himself lost as a child. The other 2 murders in this season were not committed by Joe, but some blame can be put on him. His current obsession, Love, to the surprise of everybody, proves to be just as mentally unstable as he is. After their first meeting, she began stalking Joe, even going as far as to hire a PI to look into him. And the more and more she learned, the more and more she fell for Joe and realized that she and him were soulmates. Perfect mirror images of each other. What's interesting about this confrontation is that Joe is looking at a female version of himself who has committed crimes in order to get close to him, exactly like he had done, and he is horrified. Delilah is as much on Joe as it is on Love. Delilah was looking into him and was trapped in his cage by him, and if he had released her when he should have, she wouldn't have been killed. Granted, he had no way of knowing Love was going to kill her, but you don't need to know that to not have somebody locked in a cage, alright? Candace was simply in the way. And because Love isn't the broken woman he imagined her to be, he comes to the conclusion that she's insane and needs to be dealt with. But before he can kill her, she admits that she's pregnant. Thus begins an uneasy alliance for the sake of their child. But it's clear that Joe doesn't love her as much as he thought. But he commits to her, telling himself he can learn to love her. Joe and Love move to a new neighborhood in the suburbs, and quickly he becomes infatuated with his neighbor, Natalie Anglar. And while the two are both to blame for their infidelity, it's not long before Love puts an axe in her head. Once again, Joe and Love are mirror images of each other, each willing to do whatever it takes to keep the object of their obsession. Now, fans speculate that Joe and Love are psychopaths or sociopaths, and I think so, but there are differences between psychopaths and sociopaths. A psychopath is manipulative, charming, and patient, while a sociopath is erratic and impulsive. The best way of looking at it is that a psychopath is like a lion, calmly and stealthily stalking its prey, while a sociopath is like a rabid dog, hungrily and ferociously devouring its food, and consequences be damned. It's important to note that, like with all disorders, there is a spectrum, and it's difficult to place people into boxes and labels. The real question is, do these two know that what they're doing is wrong? Yes, as they both have mused about the fact that they don't want to do the things that they've done, but rather feel like they have to. If Joe was the perfect husband, Love wouldn't have to kill. And if Love was the perfect woman, Joe wouldn't have to kill for her. Or in this case, cover up the crimes, as we see happen at least twice in this season. He cleans up after Love when she kills both Natalie and Gil. Joe can take some responsibility for Natalie since his compulsion to constantly stalk and fall in love with women he feels are the one. Love wouldn't have killed her. Gil Brigham is a tough one because he wouldn't have taken his own life had the two not tried to dig up dirt on him and his family. But I feel like he was going to do that maybe someday if the truth came out. Then would he have killed himself then? I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think all of the blame is on them. But whatever you guys think, leave a comment below. And now we've got his count up to 11. Lastly, we have Marianne, the library worker that catches Joe's attention. Now, what's interesting about her is that she is a clearly damaged woman, having had run-ins with the law, nearly lost custody of her child, and is having issues with her ex. This, I think, reignites his white knight savior complex because I don't think he really loved Marianne. He simply wanted to get away from his mirror image and, most importantly, save someone that needed saving. Love, while damaged, doesn't need saving. He begins stalking Marianne with his usual methods and ends up killing her ex-husband, who is the father of her child. Now, this is just straight up murder, as Joe just wanted him out of the way. In the end, Love is realizing what Joe is doing, and the two have a final showdown, two predators battling it out, after Love realizes that Joe just isn't good for her, and Joe just wants to get away from this crazy woman. The conflict ends with Joe coming out on top, as he ends Love's life with poison and sets her on fire. This has a dual effect because he's able to fake his death, move to London, and continue to chase Marianne down. Season 4 of You is such a departure from the original show that I barely feel the need to include it here, but all you need to know is that Joe comes to the conclusion that he enjoys killing. Again, this is a far departure of where Joe began, because in the beginning, killing was just a byproduct of Joe's obsessions. Joe would try to control the lives of the people around him, such as with Kate Lockwood, who becomes his new obsession in this season, but things just spiral out of control and he has no choice but to kill these people. Marianne, for example, is so terrified of him that she has to fake her death in order to get away from him. Now with Kate Lockwood, the two both have a darkness about, but Kate thinks she can use his to her advantage. After all, a powerful businesswoman needs a cunning predator like Joe ready to be unleashed when she needs him. Now throughout season 4, Joe kills a total of 8 people, which brings his count up to 20. As of making this video, season 5 of You has just been released on Netflix, and it serves as the conclusion to the show. Joe is back in New York City. He's married to Kate, he has his son Henry, and overall everything seems perfect. And that's just what Joe wanted, right? Right? The season starts with Kate in distress as soon as someone threatens to ruin her reputation, and the only conclusion is to eliminate the blackmailer. So, when Kate asks Joe to kill for her, he accepts her task with glee. The difference between Kate and Joe is that she feels a sense of remorse for the things that she's done, like hiding reports of her company's involvement in giving children cancer. But Joe continues the behavior of telling himself that as long as he's doing it for the right reasons, it's okay. This difference between the two starts to cause a rift between them, and the rift just gets worse when Joe meets a young woman named Bronte at his bookshop. Now, to his credit, he doesn't become infatuated with her as soon as he had with the others, but it doesn't take long before Joe feels that familiar itch. Joe learns that Kate is not as accepting of his darker side that he believed, so he begins to stalk Bronte, hoping that she would be able to love him fully for who and what he is. And initially, it seems the two seem to understand each other on a deeper level. Something that I liked that this season did is that it presented commentary. We as a society have a tendency to romanticize the dark, the toxic, and the terrifying in both men and women. And this doesn't end with just fictional characters either. It's one thing if these behaviors are between two consenting adults, but Joe doesn't care about consent, because in the end, it's about his narrative and his fantasies. The best example is the meme from Christian Grey from 50 Shades of Grey. The only reason he's able to get away with what he does is because he's handsome. If he was ugly, it would be an episode of Criminal Minds. I think there was a lot of truth to this, but I don't believe Christian Grey killed anyone to maintain a fantasy that he was the hero of his story. And in season 5 of You, it's no different, as all the deaths were done because he was trying to save the woman he thought he loved. Robert Buffalo Bob Kane was about to ruin Kate's reputation in order to get rid of her from running the Lockwood company. Reagan, Kate's half-sister, was killed after Joe locked the twin sisters in a cage and made them choose. Indirect, sure, but he still facilitated it. Clay Angevine was killed because Joe thought he was attacking Bronte, and in his mind, he was simply defending her. Dale was a douchebag and an incel, but as far as we know, hadn't done anything that we know of that deserved death. But once again, Joe killed him in defending Bronte's honor. And then the last episode, when he's being tailed by cops, he killed a police officer who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is 25 deaths by Joe, whether directly or indirectly. Now, some say it's as high as 30, but I don't know. What do you guys think? In the end, Joe was undone by his own narcissism. His own desire for fantasy, his own fault. Thinking he had bested those around him that tried to take him down, that stood in the way of his and Bronte's happiness, the two would run away together. And when they were spending the night together, Bronte had revealed that she had been manipulating him to get justice for Guinevere Beck, her old school TA. Through help and her own sleuthing, she managed to put together that Joe was her killer and responsible for the hurricane of chaos, death, betrayal, and rage, and ultimately manages to punish Joe with the one thing he feared most: loneliness, trapped in a cage for the rest of his natural life. Honestly, there is so much to go over with Joe and all the details of his character, actions, language, and disorders, but then this video would go on for hours. So, if I missed anything that you guys feel was important, feel free to put it in the comments below. So from what we have of Joe, is he an evil person? He was a man who experienced trauma as a child that no boy his age should have had to experience, resulting in a Disneyland of disorders from ASPD, PTSD, narcissism, and even erotomania. In his desire for love and companionship, his upbringing would convince him that the best way to achieve this is by control, pain, and manipulation. His search would lead him down a road of evil, through stalking, kidnapping, framing, and murder, resulting in at least 30 deaths and hundreds of lives affected by the actions of Joe Goldberg. An evil, unstoppable train of obsession, a man willing to do anything, get rid of anybody, create any lie, imagine any narrative to get what he wants. And if he can't get what he wants, he'll destroy it, resurrecting that old classic, if I can't have her, no one can. Yes, I believe Joe is an evil man, as there is no excuse for the lives lost at his hands. You may argue that some may have deserved it, or it was self-defense, but in the end, too many innocent people were caught in his tentacles of obsession to make anything he does justifiable. The most innocent of them all was perhaps Beck. She did nothing wrong except having her own agency and innocently walking into a bookstore looking for a book. And in Joe's warped mind of romance and courtship started him down that road of evil. In the end, what makes Joe so terrifying is honestly just how average he is. And really, he could be any one of us. He could be the person you just talked to. He could be your neighbor. Hell, he could even be you.